Alright, so this weekend I thought we would continue the little secret, or not so secret, trend I've been doing the past few times with these, but this time taking us from the kind of fantasy sci-fi thing we had going on last week into these late 90s teen comedies that were kind of in that era, like post-Clueless, but slightly pre-American Pie, or in some cases sometimes right around the same time as American Pie. And these are basically the two I settled on. I knew 10 Things I Hate About You was going to be this one for sure. The question was, what was the other one going to be? And when I ran this by a few people, they all pretty much said the same thing, was to keep up with the Shakespeare adaptation thing. But there's really only one other teen comedy that I know it seemed like a really regular thing there because they were doing so many modernized Shakespeare adaptations right around this time. Most of them starred Julia Stiles. But the only other one that would fit this mold was Get Over It, the Kirsten Dunst, Ben Foster one with Cisco that was like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where they were doing the play for it and everything, but it also kind of, yeah, that thing. But that was, yeah, I just felt like there had to have been a better option. Like, the only real notable thing about Get Over It was the, I remember really liking Martin Short as the teacher, and yeah, it was like really early Ben Foster before he'd done anything. I think the only thing I don't even think he'd done Liberty Heights yet, or it was right before that. So, yeah, but then ultimately it kind of, the first one that kind of came to mind was Can't Hardly Wait. Kind of abandoning the whole Shakespeare thing anyway. Because obviously the other updated Shakespeare stories that Julia Stiles did was the Hamlet with Ethan Hawke and Tim Blake Nelson's O. Just don't really fit the 10 Things I Hate About You mold at all. So this is what we end up with, and yeah, I'm more or less fine with it. Obviously this is that era where the teen comedies they were basically trying to seemingly reinvent John Hughes. Like, the late 90s were trying to have their own John Hughes era, because we had, like, the likes of these, and we had, like, She's All That, and Never Been Kissed, and Get Over It was around this time. Whatever It Takes with James Franco, all of these kind of fitting in. I think Whatever It Takes was doing a, was that the one that was doing the Cyrano thing? One of these was. I don't know. The fact that that and Roxanne exists just makes it all confusing. But, yeah, obviously, long story short, these are the two we're going to talk about. And obviously, we're going to start with 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a very loose adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew, obviously, which there have been film versions of before, most notably the one with, I think it was Elizabeth Taylor, which I saw, I just remember nothing about. That's why I'm questioning my memory if it's actually Elizabeth Taylor, but, so, yes, and this is one of those cases where this obviously has gotten kind of much more of a reputation as it went on, especially, 10 years ago, when we learned about the death of Heath Ledger, like, a lot of it, like, a surprising amount of attention was drawn to this movie, and that's one of those cases where you didn't it was popular, for sure, when it came out in 99, but it never really quite, I never really quite put together just how beloved it was until that time, and it might be one of those cases where you say, oh, well, his death is the reason it rose in popularity, and that's the end of it. But, no, that's the thing, is when you watch this back and you see where he went, and even if you, like, go back and look up some reviews from back in 99, everybody kind of knew where he was going to go when this came out. Like, he was able, like, people kind of knew immediately that he was going to be able to do the balance with his career that he does with this character, like I said, in what it seems to be this throwaway teen comedy. But yeah, because he's able to do this thing where he's obviously playing the bad boy type, but there's a surprising amount going on kind of underneath the surface that he's able to bring to it, that kind of makes it rise above the genre, I guess, and the story, really. So that even though it's loosely based on Shakespeare, I wouldn't say it's, like, the strongest story. It is a movie that is really, like, the whole concept is hinged on the idea that teenage daughters have absolutely no choice but to listen to what their father says. Like, there's absolutely no way they're going to break one of their father's rules, even when he's not in sight. Just what Larry Miller says goes, apparently, which, that's a rule I could get on board with, sure. So, yes, and that's one of those things that kind of holds you up a little bit from the start, where it's like, well, you being asked to buy this, that she would just say, oh no, well Dad said that? Well, great. Now everybody in this movie has to scheme to get around, but make sure they're also still obeying this one rule that was set by this one parent. But, once again, we'll just roll with it, I suppose. Given how far back the source material goes, fine, I guess. But I guess we can live with this. So, going on, I kind of started on Ledger, and I do want to get back to him eventually, but I actually wanted to start with Stiles, so I kind of got off my train of thought there. But, the interesting thing about Julia Stiles in this, her character specifically, is this whole kind of angle that she comes from, like the kind of feminist and like everything's part of the system and all that stuff, and she's always trying to like, you know, defy like the rules of society and in the school and all that, and she thinks everybody's like sheep and all that, and it's kind of like, back then, particularly with the way she sees, like the way things are sexist and all that, the interesting thing to watch is the, as Not Another Teen Movie put it, she's the unique rebel. And she listens to Bikini Kill and eats tofu. So, by the way, in case you haven't figured it out, Not Another Teen Movie is probably gonna be mentioned a few times, because there's just no way around it, talking about these two movies. But in the meantime, the interesting thing about that character is when you look at the characters that surround her in this, and you think about the fact that it came out in 1999, remember, we're in 1999, this was like, and Can't Hardly Wait was the year before, this was the time where, there's a scene in this where Larissa Olmec says, retard, and there are plenty of scenes in Can't Hardly Wait where people are called fags, and it's like, today, both these movies would be in headlines because of that, regardless of how very nonchalant they're said. And just keep in mind we're in that time period, so when we see the way the other literally when I say the other characters, everybody in the movie reacts to what Julia Stiles is saying about everything being sexist and she's a feminist and all that, and it's like, weirdly enough, today, Julia Stiles' character, that makes her the outcast in this, but now it would be like she's in the norm, basically. So it's really interesting to approach that movie this way when it'll be, good God almighty, next year this movie will be 20 years old. I almost feel like I'm not even calculating that right, but yeah, 1999, next year's 2019, yeah, that's what it is. That's fucking crazy, isn't it? So, because these two don't even feel that old at all. But when you look at these little aspects of it, it's like, you really see the change, even if some of it is more or less timeless, I suppose. So you have, like, for instance, the Ledger performance, which we have now made our way back around to where, yes, he is playing this, he's able to take the bad boy trope, but he's able to perform it in a way where, like, even if, I'm not even still totally sure it's in the writing, like, this still with another performer, even as is, as we see it, still could have been really bland and felt like a stereotype, but there was just something so, I guess, exotic about him, especially within this kind of scenario, because you look at everything he did that followed this, and he just really never kind of went in this direction again. Probably honestly, the closest thing was probably A Knight's Tale, and that's in the setting that it is. So, but you look at this, and you have these scenes where, like he's so big and bad that when they're in the science lab, he lights his cigarette with the flame, and it's the punk kid that puts it out. And the stuff like him drilling the hole through Joseph Gordon-Levitt's book and all that. But then, we obviously, as the movie goes on, we will learn whether or not the rumors about this guy are true, because we kind of get a feel of him very quickly, because the thing is much like the characters, is we don't really... The only reason we can go on the rumors we hear about his character is because we haven't gotten to know him yet. We're seeing him from a distance the way everybody else is. But honestly, the second somebody approaches... I mean, yeah, of course the drilling happens at this point too, but when people actually approach him and start talking to him, you kind of immediately get a vibe that he's clearly not these rumors, or at least not all of them. And that's really his performance that brings that out. And then obviously, yes, we're going to learn that he has a heart of gold and all that other shit. But that comes to light in a way that most movies like this were not able to pull off, to really, really show us what the appeal of this type of character is. And obviously this movie did that with the really famous scene, like the scene of the movie, the scene everybody remembers, that's like immortalized, regardless of the reputation of the rest of this movie. That is a scene that is just... everybody goes to. Even, like I said, when you were watching all the Heath Ledger footage 10 years ago, when all that news was going down, they almost always... I maybe... So obviously The Dark Knight hadn't come out yet, it was still like 6 months before it came out, but even so, they were using Dark Knight trailer footage. But I think they used the scene where he performs in the bleachers in the news footage more than Dark Knight clips or any other movie he did. It was always that clip, and that's the one that because everybody, when they think of him, you're going to go to two places immediately. There's the Joker, which obviously is this massive thing that you would think would be the only thing, but no, it actually has a rival with this scene. Very much so. And while we're on that topic, it's really interesting to me that when they're trying to figure out what all Julia Stiles is into, and they break into her room, and she's saying, like, well, I know that she's into guys because she's got a picture of Jared Leto in her drawer. And it's like, oh, well, if she's into one Joker, surely she's into another. And it's once again, a reference you can only make almost 20 years after the fact, but still. So, and regardless of all this as well, there's also the, yeah, and, oh yes, also, going back to another teen movie, yes, not only is everything I just said is what makes this scene, but you'll also notice that this is one of the rare movie scenes that is really famous, but also was able to survive parody. Because, obviously, the wonderful... I don't know if ingenious is the right word, but it's pretty close. The parody with Chris Evans in Not Another Teen Movie, you would think would destroy this scene, because that scene is actually so funny and works so well by itself. But no, this scene in this movie was even enough, is memorable enough, and for the genre, iconic enough, to withstand even that. It still stands on its own, and parody and reference and anything aside from that still dwarfs in comparison to what the actual scene is. So, yes, that's pretty much solidified. I think this was... At least in America, this, I believe, was one of the very first things he did. Because another thing right around one of the first movies he did was Two Hands, but that was obviously Australian on his home turf, so... Yeah, I think this is technically the first movie. I'm not completely positive on that history, but that's pretty much what we're looking at. And yeah, as far as their romance goes, a lot of it works. Some of it does feel very much like tired romantic comedy, like them on like the boat thing in the water, and the paintball thing didn't always strike me as particularly romantic, but I know we're supposed to get that vibe, as you can clearly tell. But there's still a lot of stuff that really does work, and mostly the scenes where really they're just talking to each other. I love that scene when he's bringing her home, and they're just talking about, they're debunking the rumors about each other, to each other. And I always thought that was a really nice moment. And of course we got a slew of side characters here doing all kinds of different stuff. Obviously Joseph Gordon-Levitt's trying to win the heart of Laura Solnick. Third Art from the Sun fans are having deja vu, I'm sure. And there's his buddy David Krumholtz, who provides a lot of comedy. I didn't say always funny scenes, but in genre, he provides comedy. No, a lot of it is funny, for sure, not to bring it down. And Allison Janney, of course, is the, what was she, the guidance counselor, who's also trying to write some erotic fiction on her downtime. Not even on her downtime, straight up on the clock with students in her room. She's even getting unwitting assistance from other people, like Verona mentioning Bratwurst inspires her. And she's really memorable, but she's only got like 2 scenes, weirdly enough. It's like one of those cases where when you go back and watch it again, you forget how little she's in it because her character is so memorable, even though she's barely there. And obviously, we're in this very interesting world where it really doesn't... I don't know how, like, kind of free on this other people's high school teachers were, but, like, apparently this is a school where Allison Janney will just freely say the word shit, regardless of how much Joseph Gordon-Levitt is surprised by it. There was the... she also talks about how Julia Stiles is considered a heinous bitch. There is the teacher talking about how everything Julia Stiles is doing is pissing him off. And it's like, okay, so it's very laid back here. It's a very interesting setting. It doesn't have to be a realistic one, I suppose. I mean, Verona getting the band and all that, there's gonna be that really, you know, unrealistic romantic comedy shit in here. That may not always work, but at the same time, it's like, after a while it gets to the point where you're like, well, I guess I can't really nitpick anymore if we're going this far, so whatever. But talking about the comedy I was talking about, there are definitely moments where it does seem like there's just kind of I mean, there's obviously, like, certain setups and scenes that lead to certain circumstances that lead to comedic moments. But the movie is also full of stuff that's just kind of random as hell and just, like, totally meaningless. And sometimes goes completely against character. Because we spend the whole intro of the movie basically introducing David Krumholtz as this nerdy outcast that, like, nobody likes. Like, he can hardly sit at anybody's table without getting kicked out of it. You got Andrew Keegan drawing dicks on his face. And so it's like Andrew Keegan, who was also in O, by the way. And the thing here is this moment when he gets on the bike and he goes down the hill and he crashes. And then he stands up and he triumphantly stands up, and then, like, everybody applauds. And it's like some nerd redemption or something when he did something totally fucking nerdy. And I don't... that's always been such a bizarre scene to me. Because he's never cool again after that. He never was before, and he never is after. But, okay. It's one scene that's, I guess, kind of works by itself anyway. I do think there's also those moments, though, that are really funny, like, when they go to, like, the bar and he goes up to the pool table and just picks up the 8-ball when they're clearly in the middle of a game, but once again, he's trying to look cool and failing miserably. That's the character. That's the perfect essence of that. Not so much the bike scene. And then we just have little things in there that aren't even really that spoken of, like when I was talking about Verona drilling the hole in Joseph Gordon-Levitt's book. Then later there's just a very nonchalant scene when he's using that book and it still has the hole in it. And sometimes they do overdo it, and there's times where it's like, I do think it sets up like it could, like it's random enough to work, and the randomness isn't working against it, but then they milk it. Like the moment when he walks up to her and she just kind of stops. She's in the middle of archery, and she goes to turn to him and just lets the arrow go, and we hear it hit somebody. Like, if they had just left it at that, that would have been hilarious, but for some reason we had to have the cut of somebody writhing in pain with an arrow in their ass or whatever it was. And it's like, that would have worked a lot better if we just imagined that that arrow just went and hit somebody. Maybe they wanted to reassure us it was non-fatal. I don't know. I think the movie's not that dark. I don't think you'd have to worry about us thinking that. But yeah, like I said, there's big stuff like that, but then there's just little stuff like the teacher in detention going to lean on his desk and then just standing back up in discomfort. Stuff like that that's just there works if it's small enough. But sometimes it doesn't always work when they try to go bigger. And there are, obviously, eventually, it's going to try to get really sincere. And sometimes there are moments that are okay. There's one moment where, I'm not even sure if it's intentional or not, but we'll give the director the benefit of the doubt and say it is. I think it's actually a surprisingly nice touch in this movie of all movies, where it's this shot that you kind of have to be looking when they're having the father-daughter fight, Styles and Larry Miller. And there's this, it's one of those cases where it feels like really clumsy exposition, like we're going to have regardless. And she's saying, like, oh, well, it's no wonder Mom left, or, well, of course Mom left, or this is what happened when Mom left, or something. And as they're having this conversation, when it cuts back to Larry Miller, you realize that over his shoulder you can see the family pictures on the mantle. I thought that was a really interesting kind of way to incorporate that visually while they're also kind of trying to spew exposition at us. So I thought, so that was kind of half like, yeah, that's a little clumsy, but then I'm half like, oh yeah, doing it that way actually kind of works. If it was intentional. I don't even know. But yeah, given the plot, just like She's All That. Like, there are some scenes in this movie that I realize I'm confusing with She's All That. And some, like, even the dads. It's like, sometimes I'll find myself thinking, okay, which movie has Larry Miller and which one has Kevin Pollak? Because sometimes I'm confused. And because we're in this story, and because it's one of those cases where it's either you make a bet, or you do something because you're trying to prove your friends wrong or something, or you're being paid to do something. We're going to get the lie reveal scene, where everything's going to go great. They're going to eventually fall in love, even though they didn't like each other at first. And we're going to go and go and go, but then we have to, the more they fall in love, the more we have to anticipate that scene when they're going to get all pissy and go their separate ways. Thankfully, they do the lie reveal really late. Like, it feels like it's later than usual. And usually I would criticize that because I would say, like, well, that late in, what's even the point anymore? Just try to subvert it by just having her say, oh, you were paid to go out with me? And then he's like, oh, yeah, but I actually fell in love with you. And she'd be like, oh, well, alright, fine. Which is basically what happens. Pretty much. So, yeah, and it's fine. Like, their chemistry is charming enough. The rest of the characters in the movie are likable enough. I'm trying to think if there's anybody in the movie that's unlikable. I mean, obviously Andrew Higgins going to be intentionally unlikable, but even then, he's not, like, that bad. There have been worse teen movie antagonists, for sure. But, so yeah, it's got a good spirit overall, which is really interesting to say about a movie with this title. It's got a really good spirit, and it's actually quite positive. So, and that scene where she reads the poem at the end is, like, really good. Like, it's really, really heartfelt and really works. So, yeah, I mean, so, like I said, the question does remain of, as far as how we view it as, like, this, like, classic of its genre, and Verona as a classic character in this genre, whether or not real-life events kind of pushed it a little farther than it probably would be without that. I would say, because, obviously, given the directions his career was going, it was always going to be this thing of, wherever he ended up, it was always going to be, we could look back on this and see it as the start and say, wow, we really saw the promise there, and to where he ended up, but thankfully he had, obviously it was way too short, but he had enough of a very solid career that we can still do that, even if we're looking at The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus being the last one. Looking back from there still makes this look like it was a great feat, especially since it was only the span of 9 years, which is crazy to think about. But we had all that work in between there. Yes, so alright, let's go on to Can't Hardly Wait. Something that's we're not going to quite get as, like, profound, I suppose, if you can even call it that. But what we have here is the interesting thing, actually. We were talking about getting Hughes vibes, which for sure we are not straying away from at all. But weirdly enough, it almost seems like, and I'm guessing it's the ending. Like, I'm guessing it's the when we see where everybody ended up in the text thing. Um, in the timeline, like where we are in their lives at this particular moment, it's almost like they're trying to do American Graffiti, I think. Um, the music scene is way different, and the way the characters act as well are way different. Obviously, we're in 1998 now. So, but yeah, I'm assuming that was part of the inspiration, like this mixture of American Graffiti and Hughes, which honestly seems like it'd be a winning combination. Um, Despite the fact that Can't Hardly Wait is kind of the one of these that I don't think quite got as much attention as many of the others in the category. Like She's All That is a much more recognizable title, and Never Been Kissed and all that. But yeah, this exists. This and the thing about this is also it's it's gonna be for an interesting. It's interesting to know who the audience is for this one, because obviously within Things I Hate About You there is the scene that we always expect in these movies, and that is the big party scene. Once again, most of the Hughes movies have these as well. All these teen movies have this scene in the middle where there's a long ass party where like all the shit goes down. Where like the plot is gonna turn somewhere in here and then the movie's gonna go the rest of its way. But the interesting thing about Can't Hardly Wait is that party scene is the movie. Like the whole thing is the party scene. So the question now is, if this had been made in like the later 2000s, this movie probably would have been unbearable. The party scene was a different thing at this point than it was now in this Project X phase. Could you see? You could see a clear difference of two movies that, in their entirety, are a party, but you can see how incredibly different they are given the different time frames in which they came out. So there's a 14-year difference because Project X was 2012. Yeah, there's a huge difference, and this one obviously is significantly more. Weird to say this about a 90s comedy, character-driven, I guess. But yes, we do have, actually, there are cases where this movie does feel very cliche, but there are also cases where it kind of feels like it kind of recognized that early and went a different direction. Mainly looking at Lauren Ambrose here, because when the movie starts, and you know they're going for like a Hughes vibe, and you see her palling around with Ethan Embry, and they're kind of talking and how they kind of had a thing, but also not really. Like, it was very brief, but she's still kind of always there with him. I guess she's barely with him throughout the entire movie, but these early scenes are hinted at that they seem to be together quite frequently. So you see this and you immediately think, and he's obviously got a thing for Jennifer Love Hewitt, so you immediately think, okay, Lauren Ambrose is Mary Stuart Masterson in Some Kind of Wonderful. I know exactly where this is going. Or Ducky, and it goes in the other way, but she's definitely giving me Mary Stuart Masterson vibes. So, but obviously, as we know, that's not the way the movie goes. So I do feel like it almost seems like an intentional setup for us to think that, but then it does, in fact, go the other way. And we introduce the whole her and Seth Green's character story, and then that's like, oh, so that's the direction she's going to go. Whether it's a good direction or not, I did not specify, but that's the direction we go. It's not one we were thinking in the opening scene, so there's that. But yes, obviously one of the drawing points, the poster child of this movie is Jennifer Love Hewitt as the, you know, typical unobtainable girl. But I like the way they kind of handle her in this, to where they really go for that when they introduce her. Because in the other movies, it's kind of like she's just kind of there. But in this particular movie, they really go out of their way to make her a big deal. With the whole, when he first sees her step out of the car and walk by, and when she's sitting right next to him in the classroom, they're doing everything they can to obscure her face. Whether it be her hair, or the way she's turned, or somebody passing a book to another person. And they really kind of shroud her in mystery. until she shows up at the party, and she's literally the person that stops the room when she walks in. And it's a really great intro to this kind of character. It really shows just how much of the whole kind of unobtainable girl thing has an impact on the people around her. Even if it does feel very movie-like and not completely and totally relatable to real life, which is the strength of these movies usually, I do think it really works as her character to like build her up to show this is how big of a deal she is. Like, it's not going to be one of those cases where she walks into the room and we say, oh, that's it. Because there's been enough build-up to where it's like, this is her. This is what we've been waiting for. And then it makes it easier to see where Ethan Embry's character is coming from, regardless of his actions throughout the movie. But the person I would really like to talk about real quick is, there's another very typical character type that we have in this movie. And that is, of course, the boyfriend, or in this case, the ex-boyfriend. The douchebag jock. Mike Dexter, brought to us by Peter Facinelli, who is amazing in this. Because when you see most of these movies, there's always that cliche. There's always that character. It's the douchebag guy that's like really rowdy, and he like doesn't care about anything except fucking football or whatever. He doesn't care about his girlfriend. And just because, and he's only there to get the lead girl to go towards the lead guy, to give her a direction to not go in so that she has no choice but to go to the other guy. But what Facinelli does with this character is not only does he eventually become kind of likable at the end, ultimately to go back into douchebag mode, but he makes this character really funny. He's really damn funny, because what he does here is it's like, he's found a way to play it both ways. We look at Mike Dexter and we're like, I totally know that guy. Like, this is spot on. But at the same time, it's so over the top, it's like it's parody. But it works so well, it's kind of both. So it's like, it feels like it's so over the top, it's parody, but at the same time you find yourself saying, God, that's so spot on. That is exactly the type of character these guys are. And I just love it. And I love that they were able to actually make this character funny for once. Sometimes we have laughs like at their expense. Like we say, oh, well, he's doofy or whatever. He's, you know, just this meathead or whatever. And then we let it go and we hardly ever see them. They're just this MacGuffin to get her to go from one place to the other. But no, he's one of my favorite characters to watch in this movie, and that is something that just does not happen with this character type at all. So I really loved that. And then, yeah, like I was saying, those scenes later, when he actually turns out to be not such a bad guy, should the circumstances come about. But it actually kind of bums me out he ends up going back into douchebag, because we're supposed to like laugh when it's like, oh yeah, he worked at a car wash and then he got fired and he's overweight and he's bald and he's out of shape and all that. But it's like that, what he was doing with Charlie Worthman's character was a really nice thing there. But I suppose it is kind of nice also that it's kind of like they didn't like buckle. It would have seemed like they were buckling by turning him good. It is an interesting choice to actually have him have that arc, and then his last scene is, oh no, he's still that guy, and he's not going to change. This was like a one-time thing that he was going to actually be a decent dude. Once again, he's still really funny, and when he has to be, it's because of his performance that we get to that point to where we kind of change our minds on him for a little bit, and it's like, okay, he's not so bad. See, I just love that character. That's what I'm trying to say. And I love the way the writing, the portrayal, and all that stuff brings him out. And kind of turns that character type really on its head. So, there's that. Now we get into, like, Seth Green. And I say the same thing. We're going to kind of go in similar directions here with Charlie Corson's character that we do with Seth Green. Because with Corson's character, by the way, you probably totally recognize him if you haven't picked up on him already. He was Jack in Hook. He was Sigmund in What About Bob, and he's the kid in Dick Tracy. When he grew up, he did not change at all in appearance. And it's kind of the reverse. he and Seth Green kind of go in opposite directions here, because when I see Seth Green's character, and I see this one joke thing about how he for some reason thinks he's black, which does make the character type a bit dated, to say the least, when you watch this now in 2000, what are we in, 18? Yes, that's it. So, and the more we see him, the more it's kind of like, okay, I'm sick of this joke now. Honestly, I wasn't on that board with it to begin with. But then he just has to keep showing up, showing up, showing up. But obviously this is going to be because he's going to kind of have a turnaround later as well. And obviously the whole Lauren Ambrose thing is going to, collide with this. But it's like, it's one of those cases where it's kind of doesn't do the movie a favor that he does end up having an arc. That he does have a bit of complexity, if you want to call it that, when he's trying to decide what type of person he should be when he's with her. Because this is a character to where maybe it wouldn't have been so bad or grating if he was like a background character throughout the movie. Kind of like those little bits we get with Breckenmeyer and Donald Faison in the band. Just those guys that keep kind of popping in and out. Chris Owen, I don't think Chris Owen got a line. He just walks into like every scene and just steals something in the background. I love the detail of that entire character. If Seth Green was a character like that, to where he was in the background and he just like would pop up occasionally, I don't think we'd be as tired of him by the time he ends up becoming important. Because by the time he does become important, we're really worn out on him because of this one joke. So that didn't really do it any favors. And then on the other side, of course, we're kind of having a similar thing going on here. It's kind of like he feels like he should be so much more important than he is. So he's got this whole revenge plan against Mike Dexter going on, and he's got this whole kind of, we get his whole background just like we get everybody else's background. But then once again, he becomes one joke as well. It's the kind of, outcast nerdy kid that gets a drink in him, and then he's the wild one. And that's his joke through the whole thing until he gets those moments with Mike towards the end, and we get to see some interesting things happen here. And it's kind of like, I feel like it took a little too long. We spent a little too much time making him one joke before he actually got to do some decent stuff. So, not to say that the scene of him singing Paradise City is not hilarious, because it absolutely is hilarious. But I do think that we could have, like I said, made him a bit more crucial throughout the movie, and not just played with this one thing until those scenes came. And then obviously there's staples of this genre hanging out everywhere. There's Melissa Joan Hart, like I said, Chris Owen, and then there's a few uncredited cameos. I believe Melissa Joan Hart is uncredited, as well as another really great scene with Mike is the scene with Jerry O'Connell, when it's like kind of Mike's wake-up call that he ultimately doesn't take. So like I said, we've really set up such an arc for him, and this scene is really nice, like right in the middle of all this, frantic behavior and all that. It's kind of it would seem out of place, but it's actually a really nice scene. I think it's also kind of balanced by how seriously we're supposed to take the Ethan Embry scenes that are very consistent throughout. The Jerry O'Connell scene kind of fits in with those, that kind of more, okay, let's tone it down and start to take things a little seriously, because these are going to be people that have to move on with their lives when this party's over. Which they don't focus on near enough as not enough as they should. But we also have, because Ethan Embry also gets some really nice scenes with another uncredited cameo, Jenna Elfman, who's kind of his wake-up call the way Jerry O'Connell is to Mike. So those are nice scenes. Like, if we I kind of feel like the Ethan Embry storyline could have definitely been a majority of this movie if the scenes were more like the scenes between him and Jenna Elfman. But after a while, he just kind of falls by the wayside, and it's more about the party antics as opposed to what he's going on in his thing with Jennifer Love Hewitt and all that. Which is the heart of the movie. And another person you'll see pop up is Jason Segel, and Selma Blair as well. But the funny thing about Jason Segel is you'll notice that scene, once again, we're kind of predicting the future a little bit, because this is 1998. Scooby-Doo wasn't until 2002, but obviously, around the time Freaks and Geeks ended, Jason Segel was famously dating Linda Cardellini, And there's a scene in Can't Hardly Wait when Jason Segel and another dude are saying, "Yo, dude, you know who's like totally hot but is so underrated is Velma from Scooby Doo." It's like, well, that's interesting foreshadowing to Jason Segel's life. So, and her life, because that movie came like 2 years after them, and 4 years after this movie. So, yeah, that's just kind of weird, actually. And yeah, you just look around, you'll see faces everywhere. Like, who is it? Mike's buddies are Freddie Rodriguez and who was it? Brandon Williams was the other one, the older brother of Mean Creek. And I know there's so many I'm forgetting too. There's like so many damn people in this movie. Yeah, so obviously once again though, we are going to have moments where like there's the big misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up. There are sometimes where the movie just gets a little weird. Like it's and the reason I say that is like the little thing going on with Eric Palladino's character that's her cousin, Jennifer Love Hewitt's cousin, who is like wants her romantically. And that just seems like a weird thing to throw in there, and especially the fact that it's the cause of said misunderstanding. For a movie like this, that's a weird direction to go, but I guess it's to show that she's irresistible to everybody, I suppose. And then there's also the thing of how we relate to Preston, Ethan Embry's character, because it kind of really just depends on the audience how you see him, because I could also see him being quite grating, because he's the same old hopeless romantic character. He's the guy saying like every single thing in life is a sign that's pointing me in this direction or pointing me in that direction or whatever. That's the thing I actually would like to go into, and that's the fact that really your opinion on this movie rests on that, I noticed, because I've obviously seen this quite a few times, but here's the thing, is the first time I saw it, I was like way in my early teens, like maybe not even teens, maybe like 12. And so I just saw it as another teen party movie, and then I moved on. And then I saw it again, but when I saw it again, I was in love at that point. So Ethan Embry's character was like making all kinds of sense and shit. And it's like, oh yeah, that's so relatable, and it's like, oh, and then the movie would like hit me in like really emotional ways, and I like watched it again and again and again and again and again. I have since fallen out of love, and no longer am, and watching the movie now definitely is not the same when you watch it when you are. So, and this is one of those cases where there's definitely gotta be a strength that this movie doesn't have, that's the way I see it, because there are movies like, just for the obvious example, Pretty in Pink. I don't think you have to be in love to feel nice when you watch Pretty in Pink. To watch her and Blaine get together in the parking lot and for Ducky to accept it and find Christy Swanson, regardless of what you're feeling, that's always going to be nice and touching. And you feel for those characters. You want to see those characters get together. With Can't Hardly Wait, it's kind of like, it's basically like a you have to be there thing. Because watching this movie nowadays, it's kind of like, I honestly don't care if he ends up with Jennifer Love Hewitt. And I actually ended up really liking the scene when she blows up at him. Now obviously, it's... Honestly, I think this scene would work really well if she blew up at him knowing that he wrote the letter. Because it's like, we see her, and like I said, the way they build her up, the whole movie, she's the unobtainable girl. I mean, obviously she's sad about the breakup with Mike, but regardless, she's still just seen as the pretty girl. But then when she runs into Preston and she just blows up, it's far and away the most human she is in the movie. It's like when we finally realize the unobtainable girl has her own problems, and it's like a really good moment for her, where we get to see her in a totally different light, and it's almost like... And it's like it's not always taking the side of... Like, it actually gives you that room to say that. And it's not just like, oh no, I feel so bad for Preston. The first thing you kind of think is, oh, I did not realize this is where this character was. And so, I guess it really depends on where you are emotionally, how you see this movie. But yeah, it's like being in love makes it a totally different movie. And I do kind of miss feeling that way about it, but I don't know. Should I ever fall in love again, obviously I will be like pushing 30. So it's like I'll be long past that age group, so it might stay this way forever, to where I just kind of like, uh, I don't know in regards to that, at least that storyline. Because there's still a lot of things in this movie that do work. Like I said, the movie is, I mean, there are definitely moments that don't land. A lot of it being Seth Green. I know the idea is that Seth Green's character is not necessarily, we're supposed to look at him and think, what a fucking idiot. But, still, the laughs aren't always landing, but it's still on, there's still so much, it's funnier, like, it's more funny than it isn't. Like I said, when you've got the scenes like, I love the scene with the band, when they, Breckenmeyer and Don Faison and the other guy, and they have, like, this fight, and they decide that they're done. They're gonna stop playing. And then, like, half an hour later, they say, how about we go up there and we have a reunion? And they make it, like, this big triumphant thing, and it's like, you guys broke up half an hour ago. That's really funny. Breckenmeyer himself is fucking hilarious. Watch any of his interviews with Conan O'Brien. He is, like, he's usually playing the straight man, but he is so fucking funny. And then there's, I really love the line, it's something a teenage girl would never say, but I love any way that the line is in there. And this movie was only 3 years after the fact, so maybe back then they would have. I love the line when, that one of these teenage girls actually thinks to say, oh, you're Gwyneth, you're Gwyneth, and he's no Brad Pitt, he's not Brad Pitt at all. Maybe he's not even Brad Pitt in 12 Monkeys. It's like, I want to hear a teenage girl these days just make a blatant reference to 12 Monkeys like that, talking about this kind of scenario. Like I said, whether it's realistic or not, it's really funny in context, just to hear her say that, just out of nowhere. He's not even Brad Pitt in 12 Monkeys. So, I do very much appreciate that. So, yeah, so that's what the movie mainly has going against it. Like I said, if you're in love, you probably have a much better connection to it. But if you're in the situation I am now, it's kind of like, you just acknowledge that it's got problems, but it is really funny. A lot of the time. And it's also, like, really energetic. It just has this whole thing, like, you can definitely tell it's like a 90-minute party movie. Like, it keeps that energy up throughout. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, if I have to go with one, once again, a few years ago, I probably would have said Can't Hardly Wait easily, but, I guess I would say, God, I don't know, Can't Hardly Wait might be funnier than 10 Things I Hate About You, but 10 Things I Hate About You does have moments that still hold up in the romance department, like when she's, the scene where she reads the poem goes a long way. Obviously, the scene when Ledger sings to her, probably gives 10 Things I Hate About You the edge. So, yeah, on a romantic front, I'd probably say 10 Things I Hate About You, and on top of, you know, Ledger's performance and all that stuff. But I would probably easily say Can't Hardly Wait is funnier. So, yes. So we have one more of these in regards to this little trend that I have. Surely you've picked up on it by now. And we're going back to sci-fi, but now we're doing sci-fi comedies. So, and yes, so reviews are Black Panther is coming, among many other things. So, and apparently they made a 10th Hellraiser. So I guess I'll check that out. I think it comes out on DVD on Tuesday. So apparently I will see that in time to talk about it. And yeah, probably a whole bunch of other shit. So until all that stuff, we're done.